Welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoye. The Psychology Talk Podcast is a unique conversation with experts in the field of mental health from around the globe. Topics include hypnosis and mind-body treatments, ethics and cultural diversity, psychotherapy and psychiatry, emerging treatment modalities, and much, much more. While you're listening, please give us a like and subscribe to the show. It helps us to continue to provide excellent programming. And now, here is the episode. Hello and welcome. Today my guest is Kaytee Gillis. Kaytee is a psychotherapist, author, and consultant. She works with survivors of traumatic relationships and has extensive experience working with survivors of childhood neglect and family trauma. Her blog on psychology today, Invisible Bruises, received over 5 million views in the past year. Today she's here to discuss her new book, It's Not High Conflict, It's Post-Separation Abuse, when abusers weaponize the courts as a form of retaliation. Kaytee, welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad that we're talking about this very important topic.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, maybe you can kind of like jump in here, and I know there's another book you wrote as well on the same subject matter, but can you maybe talk about how important the subject matter is and why it kind of, excuse me, flies under the radar?
Yes, definitely. So this subject is definitely very interesting because of all the dynamics involved. When you think of physical abuse or when you think of domestic abuse, usually people think of physical abuse. And rightfully so, physical abuse is never excusable and it's never okay. But what ends up happening is that all of the other forms of abuse that that happen with couples are really just not recognized. And it's so much harder to recognize them because when victims come into the courts and they have, scrapes and bruises and things like that, I mean, it's kind of a black and white issue. We see physical abuse and we want to protect, and then judges, can make decisions and things like that. But what happens when there's, terrorism going on with the couples, or when there's, child custody, like children are being used as pawns? What happens when there's psychological abuse, emotional abuse, and things like that? So those kind of things are so much harder for our court system to realize because victims don't walk into the courtroom with bruises and scrapes. And so it is a lot harder to recognize, and therefore it's a lot harder to protect victims. So that is why I wrote my books, was to help people kind of navigate that process, because it really does feel like, I refer to it actually as a labyrinth, like a legal labyrinth, and it does feel like a labyrinth when you're going through it, trying to navigate for protection.
Oh yeah. Even if it's just a normal divorce proceedings, to the people on the team, I've noticed some of the folks I've worked with, it can look normal.
Yes.
But but the person who has been on the receiving end of the abuse, they see communication as, very, very much maybe a guarded version of abuse on the part of the abuser, and navigating the system's difficult to explain that to many people, unless, of course, you're working with a good attorney who has done family law for a long time and worked with like domestic violence cases and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so hard to explain psychological abuse or narcissistic abuse to people. I mean, I work in the mental health field, and I have colleagues that don't have this specialty, and they will say to me, it just sounds like you're talking about like a bad horror movie. Like, it just doesn't make sense. I've had lawyers say to me, like, it just doesn't make sense that someone would do the things that my client is saying that they're doing, so either, something seems off, because our natural inclination as humans, we don't want to think that someone is just going to be maliciously cruel just for the sake of being maliciously cruel. Now, we know that people like that exist, of course, but it's usually something that we think of as being like in a movie or something like that. It's to think of someone actually being, cruel, just to another human being just for the sake of doing it, just for the sake of retaliation, for the sake of harming children or families. It doesn't make sense to us. And so unless you've experienced it or had a lot of experience with it, it does seem unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, because I think it's a slippery slope in the process. Usually, you have in the new book, you have kind of a composite case in there of Rory, who starts out young and naive, and the person she's engaged with and then marries is older than her. And that power differential or age differential or both tends to make one doubt oneself in the face of the decisions the abuser can start to roll out.
Exactly. And then in the case with Rory and Adam, it started kind of slowly where, when she meets him, he's going through a divorce from his first wife. And so he'll say comments to her like, oh, she just doesn't want me to see my daughter, referring to the ex-wife, or, she's a narcissist, she's coming after me. And a lot of times that's what it does sound like when the person is talking. You're kind of like, who do I believe, or what do I believe? And you could see Rory, chapter after chapter, you can see Rory say things like, it didn't really make sense, but I didn't know why someone would make that up. Or it didn't make sense, but I wanted to believe him. Things like that. And so I think that that's a lot of times what ends up happening is that people are like, this just doesn't make sense. I think that's like the number one thing I hear people say, like from judges to attorneys to mental health professionals, is like, they'll say it just doesn't make sense. And I'm like, that's when there's something, psychological going on when it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. But of course, second guessing I guess there are stages of this abuse, right? So it doesn't usually roll out instantaneously where you can kind of see it, which is one reason why the people in the court system might not pick up on it, and also why a person who's the abusee or the victim of this situation doesn't actually, it's like a frog in the boiling pot of water kind of thing. Yeah. What are those stages? Maybe you can kind of address that for the audience.
So in the beginning, and I always want to tell people it's different for everyone. I mean, every relationship is different, and every psychological abuser is different, and every victim is different. So it's not going to, one thing might roll out differently than another relationship. But usually there are some red flags there. And I talk about the red flags in my book, are what are some, signs that someone could be capable of this form of abuse, and things like cruelty to others, cruelty to animals, not having compassion or empathy, things like thinking you're above the law, thinking like you don't have to abide by the law. And I'm not talking about like, driving a little bit over on the highway or anything like that. I'm talking like blatant disregard for just our laws and the way our society works and things like that. But it's on a spectrum. Sometimes it could just be, an average everyday person that you're not know that they're capable of those kind of things. But then there's the people who kind of are like a stereotype of the psychological abuser because they like fit all of those, cruel elements of what it would take to make up that kind of personality style. But usually what ends up happening is people kind of second guess themselves, and they'll be like, okay, well, that does sound kind of far-fetched, like that story does, but, maybe, I'm just going to believe them because why not? Or maybe they just brush it off like, okay, maybe that seemed far-fetched, but oh, well, we're just going to keep moving on. Or there'll be some other red flags that people will dismiss. And a lot of times, many victims, unfortunately, are kind of like programmed to dismiss red flags. Sometimes it's due to their history, and sometimes it's due to like the conditioning of the relationship, other elements and things like that. So it kind of happens gradually. Rarely does someone come in and then from day one, they're, cruel and malicious. It's usually something that kind of builds after they get your trust and they get your, like your loyalty and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's a slow, slippery slope, difficult for a lot of people to see it. But then if you talk to somebody on the outside, they might think that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of like you're in the maelstrom and not quite know what to do. And of course, ideas of like love bombing and things like that from the abuser make it very difficult to understand where one stands.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are maybe, the book goes into detail about like misconceptions about people who suffer from this abuse. Maybe you can kind of go into some of those misconceptions to dispel them a bit.
Yeah. So a lot of the stereotypes of domestic violence in general can be applied to these stereotypes. Things like that it only happens to some people. And what I mean by that is we have an idea in our society, we have a stereotype of like the typical domestic violence victim. We think of maybe the single mom, low income, children at home, things like that. That's a stereotype. However, domestic violence, especially this form of domestic violence, the psychological abuse, narcissistic abuse, can happen to all genders, can happen to all people, can happen to wealthy people, it can lower socioeconomic status, all cultures, and all faiths. And so that's one of the major stereotypes, is that it can happen to anyone. Another stereotype is that a protection order will protect a victim, because it's kind of like that. We kind of base our laws in our society, our domestic violence laws, around the notion of physical abuse. And I always want to say I understand that, because physical abuse, of course, is unexcusable, and I'm not trying to justify it or give it any kind of hierarchy. But what ends up happening is everything else is just kind of legal. Mm-hmm. And I know that technically it's not legal. I mean, most protection orders will say things like harassment or stalking are illegal. However, how do you prove it? Things like that. How can you prove what's going on? Mm-hmm. You can prove physical abuse a lot easier. And I'm not saying it's easy to do so in most cases or all cases, but it's easier usually, sometimes, depending on what happened. So that's another thing, is that protection orders will always protect you. And I'm just disclaimer that I'm not saying don't get a protection order. But those are definitely some of like the biggest stereotypes that I see in my practice of working with clients.
Mm-hmm. You also do mention the sort of bias towards men being the abusers versus the abusees.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had clients of all genders. I mean, I work with a lot of queer clients, LGBTQ clients. I work with a lot of men who are victims of abuse, and I work with a lot of women who are victims of abuse. And I think I've seen and heard of many different scenarios that, that don't fit that stereotype. And what ends up happening is many of my clients will go to the police, and the police will make, and not all the police. I mean, there are always going to be people who are trying to help in any situation, but it's really a systemic issue. But will say things like, they're looking at this 6'2" man and this 5'2" woman, and they're like, okay, so you need a protection order from her. And like, you'll hear it in like the judge's voice or the police voice, and not all the time, but it's enough that it's definitely a barrier for many of my male clients who are trying to get protection from things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and so like, let's say if somebody is involved in the court system for separation or divorce, like what does that typically look like in these instances?
So if there's psychological abuse going on, the divorce can usually drag out forever. It feels almost like it's never ending. And that is because the person who is reluctant to give up the relationship or reluctant to give up their power and control, they're putting up every barrier and every wall. I mean, everything, even from like, okay, we're going to split up this pack of pens. You get 6, I get 6. Oh no. It's everything. So it's like pulling teeth, dealing with a toddler the whole way. And, if there's children involved, amplifies by 10. And if there's assets involved, absolutely. And so it is definitely something that it's not like the kind of divorce where people can go in and just, you have your representation, I have mine, and we kind of go our separate ways. It is something that drags out. And it becomes a lot more about almost like a attack on each other's personality or attack on the other's personality, as opposed to just ending.
Yeah. Well, and so the whole procedure becomes another form of abuse. So dragged out. Yeah. Well, someone I was speaking to, they quoted a narcissist when this individual with narcissistic personality disorder, like when people no longer paid them any attention. They reported feeling like it was like one of my limbs had been stolen from me, like cut from me, severed from me. So it's a painful experience on their part. Of course, it doesn't, of course, give any excuse for the abuse to happen. But
I can see that. Yeah, I mean, there's some triggering event there. There's some, sense of shame, sense of loss, sense of embarrassment. I'm sure, that happens, that triggers the anger and the rage.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, like how do you go about in your practice, Kaytee, working with people who are suffering from this abuse, and do you primarily just work more like as an advisor or a case manager with them, sort of, or what does the therapy look like when you're handling cases like this?
So when it depends on what stage they are in the process.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm working with someone who's right in the middle of active court cases every 2 or 3, 4 weeks versus someone who's 3 to 4 years out, it does look different. Mm-hmm. But usually what ends up being a big focus of the treatment is working through the everyday symptoms that come up in between the events. So you're working with a lot of decreasing the hypervigilance that many of the victims are experiencing every day. Because if you have court every third Thursday, for example, it's not that every third Thursday you're going to need support. It's the every Friday. It's the every Wednesday. Mm-hmm. The lack of sleep. It's the what is everyone thinking? What is going to happen next? Am I going to lose my family? Am I going to lose my job? It's all of that stuff that ends up happening. And so it's a lot of working through, how can we decrease these symptoms for you just right now? How can we make it so you can just get through the week and mm-hmm. just get through the month to the next court date? A lot of times clients will kind of do what I jokingly call it creating stories. My own therapist called it that, and I've kind of piggybacked off that, but kind of like, creating stories. And what we do is we create scenarios of, that's it. The judge is going to tell me this, I'm going to lose my children. This is what's going to happen. And people kind of create that scenario, and then they get anxious about the scenario that they've created in their head. So we work on decreasing the amount of stories that you're creating, decreasing the what ifs. I talk about that in my book about, the what ifs, because with psychological abuse, it's always the what next. It's like you're constantly looking over your shoulder, but it's in a psychological way, what next? I work with many clients who've had their exes put in complaints to child protection. I've had many people who I work with who are either lawyers or doctors and have had their ex-partners put in complaints to the bar association or to the medical board, just for retaliation. And that is a stressful thing to go through. And so it's a lot of that kind of stuff. So it's you can't even sit down and organize, okay, this is what I need to do for my divorce. It's now I'm fighting against my, the bar association and my ability to practice law and feed my family. So it's a lot of constant hypervigilance. People are in a constant fighting for survival mode, when they're in the middle of it. Yeah. And then they've come kind of out of it. It is the managing, the kind of bringing yourself back down to, kind of how you would treat someone after they've survived a trauma. Now we're gonna, remember that you're safe and kind of bring you to the here and now.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you're describing it, the rate at with which, and the kind of the image I'm getting here of the abuser's actions, there's absolutely, they're just reacting and getting angry to some kind of internal shame or whatnot. But it makes no sense. Why would you do something like call the bar association or the medical board or the social work board to do? Why would you do that?
Retaliation to say it's just like a screw you. It's
and you can never, if you don't have that kind of mindset or personality style, that doesn't come across. It's not in your wheelhouse. You would never. It's so surprising that somebody continues this constant onslaught.
Yeah, to people who would never think to harm another person in that way. I mean, the only time I could ever think of putting a complaint to a medical board is if someone, does something horrible, medical malpractice, something that's harmful. not just because someone ticked me off.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Exactly. Yeah.
So I mean, to ruin someone's livelihood for something like that. So no, it's blatant retaliation, but to people who wouldn't think to do stuff like that,
it's absolutely, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Like from normal standard, obviously that's not a legal or a mental health term, but yeah. But,
no, I know,
yeah.
but and thankfully, most of the lawyers and the board complaints that I've seen, most people are like, okay, we can kind of see what's going on. So most of them are dismissed, but it doesn't mean that the person isn't suffering for the 6, 8, 10 months that they're dealing with it.
Right. Well, what about post-divorce issues? Have you seen with some of your clients post-divorce, the issues are still apparent and it never ends?
It just, as long as I always tell my clients, plan for the worst, but hope for the best. But until your kid is not even 18, I would say 21, 25, until your children are of that age where you don't have to have the constant contact, just, plan that they're going to continue the behaviors that they already are. Because if you can use an 8-year-old as a pawn, you're still going to do that when they're 12, just in different ways.
One would think that they would get a bit bored.
And you would think so. You'd think after years and years that people would kind of move on, but it's just the amount of it's anger, sometimes it's rage, sometimes it's like they really do feel like they were wronged. Like in most cases, like I have yet to see, and I mean, maybe they do exist, but I've yet to see a psychological abuser or someone with narcissistic traits who doesn't think that they were the one who was victimized. Usually that's what ends up happening is they're saying, I was victimized by this person. She cheated on me, or he cheated on me. So then they shouldn't be able to have the kids, whatever the thing is that they think happened. But rarely does the person ever say, no, I'm just doing this just to get back at them. I mean, I suppose it does. Yeah. I suppose it does happen, but.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's yes, they are doing it to get back at them, but that would probably mean that there is something wrong with them if they were doing that. So they'd never say that.
Yeah, because then it would be so obvious, and then it would be, I think maybe it wouldn't be as rewarding because it would be dismissed. I don't know, but usually that's what ends up happening is you'll see, which is why the courts, and I understand we have a lot of systemic issues right now, and we need some systemic change, but courts, for all their faults, I kind of understand where they're coming from, because judges will look at me in trainings and consultations and they'll say, I don't know who to believe. Like, it's literally he said, she said. That's what they'll say to me. I don't know who to believe. And so that's why I work through with my clients. We go through the things to say in court, the things not to say in court, the things not to say about the person, certain words not to use and things like that, because you have to really focus on the behavior and you can't make it look like it's just a character assassination, because two people come in and they're both engaging in character assassination. I understand the judge's point. They're like, look, I don't know who to believe.
Yeah.
And they'll say to me, like, a lot of times they'll say, Kaytee, I can see that this person is a jerk, but there's no law against being a jerk. So until they put their hands on them or the children, or until they make threats or something like that, I can't give them a citation for being a jerk.
Correct. Yeah. And I was going to bring up the topic of training. So you do work with judges, you do work in the court system to try to train people how to look at levels of abuse that are outside of the realm of like bruises and scars and things like that, like physical abuse.
So a little bit. I do as much as I can. It's judges are very, and maybe every field is like this, but judges, like law enforcement and court system, they don't like being trained by people who like aren't like in with the in crowd.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course.
So
yeah. I mean, I think every profession has its cartel.
Which is true. I mean, it's kind of like someone standing up and telling me about the DSM and you've never like opened it. I'd be like, But so I can understand it, but as much as I can, yes, I do. I am engaging in a lot of, trainings, a lot of consultation, and things like that, and like supporting clients and supporting the lawyers who are working with the clients, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what's going on. And so I will have judges that will turn to me and or like turn to us and say things like, this doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know who to believe, and I don't want it in my courtroom. And so based on hearing that so many times, I come up with a list of like, okay, this is what you shouldn't say, like based on what will probably give you the best idea. And of course, and I always give the disclaimer, it's definitely not legal advice. It's more of like, from a mental health perspective, how can you navigate the situation the best way?
Yeah. I think, yes, always moving them back to, well, your attorney is your best friend in this case, as far as a legal proceeding. So, yeah, I think there should be a movement to like change the laws around what is defined as, partner abuse. Like, I think it should be broader, perhaps, or specific to. It's so difficult, though, and especially people who lack empathy and have grown up that way, either because of a neurological issue or like it's a neurological cause that they have no empathy and they play these kind of games with people, or their own traumatization. They don't know any better, and they kind of they mask, if you will, to borrow an autism phrase, of being normal. They know how to fit in.
Yep, absolutely. And usually it's that little amount of, I like that word, masculine, little amount of like trying to play the part, and the acting that they do is what gets them as far as they can. Because if someone was like breaking down the door of a courthouse screaming, I'm gonna get back at my ex-husband because he moved on, found a younger woman, I'm gonna get back at him, no one would pay attention to that person. Now, but if they go in, saying that they're just trying to protect themselves, they're the victims, it really is a situation that does create a lot of elements. And I understand that can happen in physical abuse too, but with this form of abuse, and I do want to say most states, most protection orders will have different categories, and it will say like emotional abuse is on. Of course, can't speak for all states, but it is on a lot of states, and there are different categories. However, when you go in and you apply for a protection order, they categorize it based on I'm not speaking from a legal standpoint. They don't sit there and literally categorize it, but physical abuse will get a judge's attention versus, they did this, or they called me names, or they're following me to work. Following me to work might get a judge's attention, but there's like different kind of categories of like what it is that's going to get the protection order and how long.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's flabbergasting to me that this has not really come to the attention of the court systems. Is there a move among family law practitioners to kind of expand this definition or attend to these issues? Because it seems to me it is kind of pervasive. Thank God, thank goodness there's no like large N number of narcissists and it's a small number, like 1% to 2% of the population. I mean,
with the way social media is right now, you'd think it was every other person, but
that might be emotional or cognitive contagion, right? I mean,
it always is. I mean, a lot of times clients will come in and say, I think my ex is a narcissist, and it's like, okay, well, let's explore this. And sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But it is definitely a buzzword right now. And so judges, usually be like, don't use that word. I mean, they're not going to say this in my experience, but they're like, don't use that word in my courtroom. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear allegations of who's a narcissist. Like, stop using that word. And so that's just something I talk about in my book. Like, don't label anyone. I actually go through steps of not assessing the patterns and not labeling the patterns, just describing the behaviors. I talk about ways to do that and like things not to say. Do not stand up and say, Judge, she's a narcissist. It will not help your case. Because the judge, and I understand that. They're kind of like, I don't care if they are a narcissist or they aren't. Like, I'm here to rule on the law. I'm not here to rule on the DSM, and makes sense. Like, are they doing something illegal? You can be narcissistic and sit in your house and not do anything illegal, and I'm not going to give you a citation. So like, I understand that. But there is a movement right now among a lot of people who have experienced these forms of injustices and forms of traumas through the legal system and through the family court system. So I think there's a bunch of like little movements who are kind of like all under this like umbrella movement, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the umbrella is like family court reform, but then there's like different like sub movements, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So there seems like it might be gaining some ground.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly people in behavioral health, if you've been in private practice long enough, or even if you're a school psychologist or, a social worker or something, you're going to hear these horror stories, and it's not just your imagination or your client's imagination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it does, the first time people are exposed to it, because I'll do consultation with clinicians who will say to me, I just don't know what to believe. This seems kind of odd, or people who are working with couples but they're seeing some weird kind of psychological traits and stuff like that. And, when I'm in no way perfect. I've definitely probably had many clients or worked with many couples where I didn't see what was right in front of me. But I think that is the importance of consulting, because so many of us, like the first time you see it or the first couple times you see it, it is odd. It's like, is this person just having a bad day? Or are they just kind of mean, kind of a jerk, like, or what's going on?
Right. Yeah. What are some of the ways besides, you kind of talked about like what not to say in court, prepping, trial prep, even though that's not our wheelhouse, but trial prep, or like how to help people mitigate their anxiety. Are there any other ways people might be able to help themselves who are in this kind of a situation where the law has been weaponized?
So I usually, with clients, we start with, how can you empower yourself? Like, what things can you control? Mm-hmm. You can't control things like continuations. You can't control the legal side of it. You can't control whether or not the judge is going to rule yes or no, who's going to show up, and what time you're going to go and how long you're going to be up there, whether or not you're even going to get to talk. But what you can do is empower yourself to best prepare for the journey. So there's a list in my book about like what types of things to bring into court. I talk about things like chapstick, things like bringing some water, some loose bills in case you need to make copies, things people don't think about. So then when you're in court, you're kind of scrambling. Well, crap, I really need a granola bar. I didn't realize I'd be here for 4 hours. How can you empower yourself to best kind of stay, through the keeping, kind of like keeping hydrated through the marathon, bring more water than you think you'll need, that kind of thing, because you need to prepare for the journey. And, what kind of things to write down, organizing documents from date and chronological order and things like that, and making sure that you have the date. Because if a judge asks you, okay, all right, what time did he drive to your work, or what day did he drive to your work? Okay, you can say it happened April 3rd, 4:00, instead of being like, oh, I don't know, Your Honor, I think it was like sometime in the spring. Judges don't like that. They're like, what date, what time, what happened? And so practicing that, because victims, because to you, it doesn't matter if it was April 4th. To you, it feels like it's happening every day. So for victims, it's really important to really kind of write that stuff down, practice the dates, practice telling your story calmly with a straight face to your mirror. Things like that.
Right. So, like having, before I got into this behavioral health side of things, I used to be a paralegal, and my wife's an attorney. So,
so this is more your wheelhouse.
Yeah. So it is kind of in my wheelhouse. So I've learned through my mistakes and my wife correcting me in job situations. Anytime you have a nice paper trail, and you keep a memo to file on anything, that's going to stand up, especially in the world of work in HR, or which is legal, the legal portion of work, or in the legal system. So you're right in saying that, and I think that's a profoundly way to, like, it makes you feel like it's almost like journaling, but it's with more of a purpose.
Yes, and because having things documented, even if they're things like text messages or emails, having it all in chronological order. Okay, I got 3 emails on June 3rd, and then 2 phone calls followed up on July 7th, and being able to say that with confidence to a judge. and being able to say in a courtroom where you're, it feels like you're, standing in front of all these people and most of them are bored and kind of just like, oh, let me look at this. People don't have their phones with them, so they're all looking at you. It's an intimidating experience. So what can you do to empower yourself to get through that? Okay, we know this happened April 4th, happened June 2nd. And I've seen things like diary entries where people wrote in their diary. I've seen things like that hold up in court way more often than, oh, I don't know, what happened sometime in the summer. I mean, it was hot. Judges don't like that. So, I mean, again, definitely not speaking legal experience, but from what I've seen happen, that's definitely something I recommend that clients do, so that way they can practice retelling their story and owning it.
Yeah. And I also think that the other positive is that I assume the abusers are not doing such things in most cases.
Usually not, because they're the ones who are, doing the things like driving to your house. But what they will do is they'll say, oh, well, I was out of town that weekend, or I was this, or I was that. Many people who are capable of psychological abuse are also capable of lying. And there's no nervousness that comes from lying in front of a judge on a witness stand, lying under oath. It just, things like that, even citations, subpoenas, they're just blatant lies. And it's just amazing because to me, I mean, I would feel nervous lying to a police officer, let alone a judge. And
right. Yeah.
It's just no way. And, but yeah, they'll blatant lies. Oh no, I was with my my mom that day. We were in Arizona, and it's just blatant lies. Or they'll have things like, I'm trying to think of like what else I've seen, but I'll see them have their own documentation that doesn't have anything to do with the documentation that was presented. Almost like a counterattack. And usually the judges will say things like that doesn't make sense. However, it does depend on, if the person can afford a good attorney, will just be like, it can make it worse. And so that's why.
Yeah.
Even if they are lying, the attorney gets everything, they advocate for them,
Yeah.
But a good attorney can be a rough situation. Yeah.
Right. And that's what they're paying for. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Any other tips or things you might have, or any thoughts you might have in this situation?
So I want people to know that it is something that does eventually get better. And what I mean by better is, it gets more manageable. And there are times where you'll feel like this is never going to end. And it feels like you're being attacked from all sides. This is never going to end. And even things like going to the store and getting groceries can feel just like terrorizing, because you're just living in like this hyper aware state. But I want you to know that it does eventually get easier to manage. The allegations might not stop, and the retaliation might not stop. It might get further and fewer between, or maybe it does stop. You hope it does, but you will develop ways to not react as much. Your body, your mind, everything starts to get stronger, and you'll realize that certain things don't bother you as much. And I'm not talking like usually weeks or months. Maybe a few years down the line, when you get another subpoena for, child custody or whatever, you'll be like, here we go. And you can kind of laugh it off. And it's stressful. It's always going to be stressful, but it'll start to be where you feel more empowered, and you can kind of manage the aftermath of it a little bit more than you thought you could.
Maybe you can give a little plug for your 2 books and your website.
Oh, yes. So my first book is called Invisible Bruises, how understanding the patterns of domestic violence can help victims navigate the legal system. So I haven't said that one in a couple of years. And then the one I just published last month was It's Not High Conflict, It's Post-Separation Abuse. So both are available on Amazon. And then my website is www.KaytLynGillis.LCSW.com. I know my name is spelled weird. It's KaytLynGillis, LCSW for licensed clinical social worker.com.
Okay. Excellent. Well, Kaytee, all the best. Thank you for coming aboard, and we'd love to have you back.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. Did you know the Psychology Talk podcast is all over the World Wide Web? Well, not entirely all over, but we are in social media and we do have a website. Pop over to www.psych-talk.com to find out more about the show. All material is copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. Opinions of our guests are not necessarily those of the host or the show. Material is provided for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.